England, 2016. One night, Justin and her boyfriend Tom went to bed around 9:30 p.m. Their cat was also in the room, hanging out on the dresser. After falling asleep, Justine suddenly woke up. The room was dark, but there was some light coming in from a street light outside. She saw the door on the other side of the room, and suddenly, three strange gray creatures appeared. They were standing on the left side of the bed. These creatures were short, about 3.5 feet tall, and they weren't wearing any clothes. They had gray skin, skinny bodies, and no visible bones or private parts. Their heads were shaped like pears, with big black almond-shaped eyes, tiny nostrils, and thin mouths. Justine realized she couldn't move or make any noise. She could only move her eyes. Tom was still asleep next to her. She looked at the clock and saw that it was around 10:30 p.m., an hour after they went to bed. She wasn't really scared of these creatures. She realized she was more upset that she couldn't move. Then she heard a voice in her head. She realized that it was coming from one of the creatures standing at the foot of the bed. The voice sounded male and said, "You went to bed early tonight," in a normal way. At that time, Justine noticed that one of the creatures had gone over to the dresser. The cat was there, but not paralyzed like her. The creature was petting the cat's chin, but the cat didn't seem to be bothered or scared. Suddenly, Justine blacked out. When she woke up in the morning, she felt strange, like something was missing inside her. She remembered everything that had happened, and she asked Tom, "Did you hear anything last night?" When he said no, she told him about the gray creatures. He just gave her a weird look. Then she remembered the cat and went to find him. He was in the living room, and when she checked his chin, there was a small round hole in the middle of it, but no blood. She and Tom looked around the house for anything that could have caused it, but they couldn't find anything. Justine was sure that the gray creatures had done this to her cat. Washington, July 24th, 2016. Julie and her boyfriend Alex were walking to their friend's place on Juniper Street. As soon as they started walking, she noticed something weird. There were no stray animals around, which was pretty odd for Oroville. As they walked the block further, she saw a small red light over the Similkameen River. At first, she thought it was just an airplane and pointed it out to her boyfriend. But when the light abruptly changed direction and started flying towards them, they realized that it wasn't a plane. She started feeling scared and tried to distract herself as they hurried towards their friend's house. Then, she noticed a rainbow circling the moon. But the moon was twice as big as it usually was, and it wasn't in its normal spot in the sky. They finally reached the high school, and they decided to head home via Ironwood Street because it had more streetlights. As they walked, she saw that every star in the sky was blinking blue and red. Dark clouds were quickly covering the valley from all directions, even though there was no wind. The night got so dark. It was the darkest that she had ever seen. Then, they heard footsteps following behind them. They couldn't see anyone, but the footsteps sounded like they were being herded back towards their house. Her boyfriend told her to keep quiet and walk faster, so they picked up the pace. When they turned the corner and saw their friend's truck, they made a beeline for Alex's house. But the clouds were getting lower and lower. Under a streetlight, they saw the outline of a small human-like figure watching them. They tried knocking on the friend's door, but no one answered. They decided to run home, which was only half a block away. But as they ran, they saw another figure watching them. When they made it to her yard, Alex finally saw the figure as well. The clouds were so low at this point, they covered the top of their spruce tree. They ran to the porch and she started yelling for Alex to get inside. But just then, a bright beam of light came out of the clouds and hit Alex. He was frozen, and he just looked up. She started screaming and trying to get his attention. After a minute, he finally looked at her. She closed her eyes, reached into the light, and pulled Alex out, and they ran into the house. She was so scared she refused to look outside. But Alex seemed confused, and he couldn't remember anything. He also said that he couldn't hear her when she was yelling his name while he was under the beam of light. Western Washington, early August 2016. Ben was tasked with protecting a property that was prone to trespassing by drug users, some of whom were violent. He armed himself with a rifle and began trolling the dense woods. One day in August, he felt the need to rest under a large old cedar tree. He put down his rifle and backpack, closed his eyes, and began to feel at peace. After a while, Ben opened his eyes and saw a strange figure near the old tree grove. The figure was about 15 feet off the ground, and it wasn't solid. It looked like the air was rippling, similar to the invisible alien in the Predator movies. It had a visible head, neck, and shoulders, but the rest faded into nothing. Seeing this figure filled Ben with an intense fear, so he didn't dare move. Eventually, he took off his glasses, cleaned them, and then put them back on. But the figure was still there. In his head, Ben counted back from 5, and then when he reached 0, he quickly grabbed his things and ran home. Fortunately, nothing followed him. Later, as he recounted his experience to a friend, he told him that he had encountered a forest wight, a guardian spirit. His friend went on to suggest that he leave an offering of food for the spirit. Ben stayed away from that area for a while, but came back in September of 2016 to take pictures. He brought an offering of food and water, and although he still felt a sense of dread, it wasn't as intense as before. He didn't see the figure, but he felt its presence. After leaving the offering, he felt okay. He spoke out loud explaining that he was just trying to protect the property and didn't want anything to follow him home. Around that time, Ben found a strange L-shaped hole about 75 feet from the cedar tree. It was neatly made and it didn't seem to be the work of any animal. He took photos of it, and the next time he went back, he found 2 long scratches in the earth near the hole. They were about 2 feet long and the width of a man's foot. It looked as though someone had dug their boot heel in deep into the ground and dragged it. Utah, October 15th, 2016. Around midday, a 10-year-old girl and her 8-year-old brother were out playing in a field behind their house with 3 other neighborhood kids. The field was full of old cherry trees and tall grass. Suddenly, the kids ran into the house scared, saying that they had seen a small red creature hiding behind a bush. The parents noticed how genuinely scared these kids were. They all said that they had seen it and watched it for a while as it stared back at them. Based on the kid's description, the father thought that the creature had been about 70 feet away. The parents asked the kids if it could have been a fox or a dog, but the kids were sure that they had seen something on 2 legs. It was a bright red creature, a red that doesn't exist in nature. The parents were a bit unsettled, but decided that the kids were probably just imagining things. The kids, however, refused to go back outside that day. Later that night, their 16-year-old son came home frightened. He and his friends had seen something strange a few blocks away from the house. He said that they saw an object in the sky, moving too slowly to be a plane or a helicopter. It was triangle-shaped with lights on the corners, and it made a soft buzzing sound. He said it was a dull metallic color. The object moved behind some trees near their house. The boys ran to keep it in sight, but when they got to the spot where they should have seen it, it was gone. Given the speed that it was moving, it should have still been visible. The fact that it seemed to have vanished scared them. The son, who usually doesn't exaggerate or make things up, was visibly shaken by the experience. In 1936, a Russian civilian ship named Maria from Leningrad was traveling across the Pacific Ocean. One day, the officer on duty saw an unusual object on the water that looked like a ship rising from the sea. There was no sign of life, and the odd object didn't answer the Maria's radio calls. After watching it for a while, the Maria's captain sent a small boat to check on the mysterious object. 5 brave sailors rowed towards this object while the rest of the crew watched. Suddenly, this unknown object started moving away quickly and vanished into a cloud or a fog. Any attempts to follow or reach the object were useless. After searching for several hours, the Maria's captain instructed the ship to continue on its original path. When the ship returned to the area a few days later, The captain commanded the crew to follow the same route. Near the spot of the unexpected encounter, the officer on duty spotted a strange boat unlike any he had ever seen. This boat was see-through, and 3 of the original 5 sailors who had gone to investigate the unknown object were inside it. As the Maria got closer to the boat, one sailor screamed and jumped into the water. Despite an immediate search, he was never found. The other 2 were brought back on board, and they were relieved to see their crewmates again. They then shared an incredible story. They claimed that when they were brought on board this strange vessel, they were surrounded by odd creatures wearing dark, shiny suits like divers. Their limbs were somewhat human-like, with small webbed membranes between their fingers. These creatures seemed to communicate with each other telepathically, not with words, although sometimes they would use gestures. The aliens told the men that they couldn't go back, and they asked them to stay. The sailors agreed, and they were separated from the others, never to be seen again. The remaining 3 were locked in a room where they estimated they stayed for about 2 days. Suddenly, the 3 men found themselves back on the strange boat, with a supply of unusual tablet-like food in clear packets. Eating just 1 or 2 of these tablets was enough to stave off their hunger. One man refused to eat the tablets, and he threw them into the sea while the others slept. They were without food for a day, but didn't feel hungry. Then, they saw the Maria approaching. When the survivors were brought back on board the Maria and the ship started moving away, waves engulfed the strange boat and it sank into the ocean. The crew had been unable to bring the strange boat on board because there was nothing to hook onto. After the Maria returned to Leningrad, the captain reported the incident to the authorities. The captain and the 2 surviving sailors were called in for questioning by the officials. One sailor was deemed mentally unstable, while the other refused to cooperate. The captain insisted that these events were true, referencing the ship's logbook as evidence. However, he was eventually forced to retract his statement and deny that anything unusual had happened. Not long after that, the captain was transferred to another ship.